Welcome to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. And if you're joining me live, and even if you're not, I still appreciate you, but if you're joining me live, that means that you no longer are questioning whether or not the show has officially moved. I told you, this week, starting this week, we're going to do this through the end of the calendar year. We're going to monitor traffic on YouTube and on podcasts and on Facebook and on X. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Because I decided at some point that it just didn't make sense to keep having multiple days in between the Eagles games and having a reaction show. And so I said, you know what? We're going to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we're going to see how it goes. Plus, Flyers play a lot. The Sixers finally look like they might be a relevant team again, or at least on their way to that. And so I said, you know what? 3 times a week, we're going to give it a shot. We'll see how it goes. But I want to thank everybody who's joining me this morning, wherever you get your podcasts. Those people who listen in Apple Podcasts and Pandora and Amazon Music and Spotify and all that wonderful stuff after the fact. I love and appreciate all of you. But those of you who join live on YouTube, X, and Facebook, you are, I'm not going to say you're my favorites, but I'm going to say that, like, you might be the favorites. We can't make promises yet. Now, there are a lot of things going on. A lot happened in the Eagles game against Carolina, and there may or may not be some concerns out there. If you watched the Press Row show last night, you'll know what my thoughts on the Flyers-Utah game were. Spoiler alert, there weren't that many, and I don't even think we're going to get to the Flyers today. There is one non-Philadelphia sports story that we will get to. It impacts the Philadelphia sports landscape. I don't know if we should start there or not. Maybe we should. I mean, it's a little bit more of a breaking thing. We'll get there a little bit later on. Juan Soto spurns the New York Yankees, who had previously acquired him, and he goes across town and signs with the Mets. The Phillies were never even in the running. Did Dave Dombrowski fail the Philadelphia Phillies? We'll get there later on in the show. But before we get there, we're going to get into the Eagles because the Eagles are ultimately what matters the most in the town. The Eagles picked up yet another win, their 9th consecutive. They look very well on their way to a strong postseason showing, and we can say the postseason because they officially clinched their spot in the playoffs with a win over the Panthers, and it was a game that brought plenty of concern back to the surface. We're going to get there, but before we do, I'm going to go out to the comments really quick and give a little tip of the cap to the people who decided that they were going to join us on a Monday morning. Not a Tuesday. There will be no Tuesday show. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. 3 times a week. You get more joy in your life. Isn't that how it's supposed to work? I will also tell you that the goal today is going to be in and out shorter than normal. Like, I don't think we need to do an hour plus 3 times a week. Maybe we will at some point. I don't think we have to do that today. We'll see. We'll see where the spirit takes us today. How's that sound? Andrew Foster with a good morning. Chris Freed says, with you going 3 days a week, you need to upgrade the jingle, my man. Chris, we're going to get there. All right, start to invest in the music. I'm also like going through the reinvesting in equipment thing again. I miss having my wide shot with all of the bobbleheads, so I'm working on that as well. We're going to get this thing back up to snuff. I saw Ford has a bunch of stuff about the Eagles. We're going to get to some of Ford's observations as well. Let's see. Ford says, it's amazing to me that YouTube still does not allow the ability to share links in the chat. This is AOL in the 90s. It is true. Andrew Fawcett also says about the Eagles, there are definitely some interesting trends that haven't corrected themselves from last year. Michael Sirkin says, rough weekend for Philly sports. I can sense the sarcasm. Very good weekend. The Sixers got back on track, which Joel Embiid, maybe he just needs to play on days where nobody's paying attention to the team. But Embiid looked really good yesterday. I didn't get to watch the full game in full transparency, but they looked pretty good. You can make the case that on Sunday, 3 Philadelphia teams won. The Eagles won, the Sixers won, and the people who actually know that you need elite talent in the draft, well, they know that the Flyers actually did win by picking up 0 points against Utah. A good weekend. Good weekend overall. Nico comes in here with a what up. We got Jamie with a good morning. We got a Spiral Out with a what up. All right. Jake Rebby with a good morning. We are all over the place this morning. Okay. Jonathan Shankup, you let me know. Says this is a lifelong Phillies fan. The Juan Soto signing by the Mets really hurts. Don't worry, fella. We're going to get out there. We will get to the thoughts on Juan Soto signing with the Mets. We'll get there a little bit later on in the show. It is upsetting. It is disappointing. And somehow, I feel like it was entirely predictable. We'll get there a little bit later on. All right, let's start with the Eagles. And I want to dispel a very clear misnomer. There is a misunderstanding and a misconception that the Carolina Panthers are a bad team. They entered the game at 3-9, and I think, everybody said it was a trap game. I even said on this show last Friday that there was a concern to some extent that this could be viewed sort of as a trap game because you have Pittsburgh off in the distance, and you know that you're going to have some divisional games to wrap up the season. You've already gotten over the biggest hurdle, which was Baltimore. There was a smaller, still an important hurdle in the Rams. You got through that one as well. But Carolina, at least on paper, there was a potential that you could maybe overlook some things, that you could overlook that team, that you could ultimately not give them the respect that they deserve. And Bryce Young, we broke down the stats on Friday. Bryce Young, since being reinserted into the lineup, has been significantly better, has looked much more like the guy Carolina thought they were drafting, more so than the guy who started this season and looked absolutely lost, dazed, and confused. That Carolina team is better than the record indicates. And I talked to a few people yesterday who were at the Flyers game who maybe didn't get to watch every snap. And they were like, did it really look, was it really as close as it looked? And I said, well, it was. And in fact, had it not been for Leggett dropping that ball with 30-odd seconds left in the fourth quarter, that could have been a loss. It ends up being a little bit lucky. He sort of traps the ball, moves around a little bit. You're going to call that an incompletion. The far side ref was ready to call it him down, I believe, at the 1. And the near side ref is the one who ended up overruling it, saw the bobble of the ball. But you were very close to being in a nasty, nasty situation if you were the Philadelphia Eagles. You were very close to blowing a game that you absolutely could not lose. And especially coming off the win over the Ravens, the last thing you could afford to do is follow that up with a stinker. Now, there are concerns coming out of that game, but I want to start with some positives. Am I allowed to start with a few positives? Because I would like to. And it's two veterans who were very critical at important junctures of this game. And they're in the thumbnail of the episode. CJGJ gives up a touchdown, comes back, gets an interception. That's a big play, big momentum shift. And on the final play of the game, we're going to give back his nickname, my friends. Darius. No longer Darius. Big Play Slay is back. Big Play Slay is back, my friends. The pass breakup to seal the deal, to seal the game, was a big play. He actually had another play earlier in the fourth that made me go, ooh, maybe we're close. Maybe we're close to the return of Big Play Slay. Now, he gets the name back. CJGJ has a big moment. Big Play Slay comes back. And all of a sudden, you start to once again think about what an absolute masterful unit Vic Fangio has put together and is maximizing at each and every moment. We talked last week, and we've been talking about for weeks, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Reed Blankenship. We've given Ringo credit. Finally, the vets showed up in this game. And CJGJ has brought back that swagger. We've talked about that a lot this year. The swagger that he's brought back to this defense is something they absolutely missed a season ago. And Slay, despite the fact that he's missed a little bit of time here, Slay coming back in and playing as well as he did yesterday is a truly encouraging sign. Now, there's kind of like a blessing in disguise sometimes with veteran players later in seasons. If a guy's out injured and he's able to kind of rehabilitate and he's able to not have to put those extra reps on the body and can maybe enter the postseason even healthier than normal, I view that as a net positive, especially when the young guys that have filled in for him have played as well as they have. So like you think about when you get to the playoffs, right? If you lose a veteran player on defense, it's always, well, all right, next man up. But as we've said a lot of times with defensive backs, you don't expect young guys to be able to step up, and you certainly don't expect them to get meaningful minutes in games that kind of help them build the confidence. That's kind of to the contrary this year with the Eagles. We know that the young guys are able to step up and play significant minutes and play significant roles. That, my friends, is actually a very big positive. So when you have those guys playing well, and then you add CJGJ and Slay back into the mix, and they both look good, you're at a different level. Now, I pointed out before, CJGJ gave up a touchdown. I believe CJGJ was the one who got burned on the Leggett one that the ball hit the ground. But after the first blown play where they gave up the touchdown, him to come back out on that next possession and get that interception on the overthrown ball, that is the kind of moment that the Eagles need. I think I said this last week. It might have been last Tuesday. The thing that's going to take this from being a very good defense to a great one, or from a great one to like the best in football, is they need to start winning the turnover battle. Now, Jalen Hurts has done a very good job in recent weeks of not turning the ball over. But you need the defense to make big plays in big moments. You ultimately need to record takeaways. Punch the ball out, get a pick, get a massive sack, knock a team, further out of field goal range, get those momentum plays. This defense has been really good at it. That CJGJ pick was certainly one of them. So those are positives. And Zack Baun looks like an absolute monster. Like that, no one saw this coming. No one saw Zack Baun coming. I do not remember a single person in the offseason who said, wait for the Zack Baun season. Wait until he gets the opportunity. Here are some stats from Sunday on Zack Baun. He had 11 tackles. 11. He had a sack. He had 3 tackles for a loss. And he had 2 hits on the quarterback. I'm going to say those again because they're astounding. I'm going to go in reverse order. 2 QB hits, 3 tackles for a loss, 1 sack, 11 tackles. The man is an absolute beast. And we were questioning going into the season, could the Eagles linebacking core that has often been overlooked, has been undervalued by this GM, could they put it together? They have. Zack Baun is a big part of that. Nakobe Dean has played well this season. Now, I found a tweet here from Brandon Lee Gouton about Zack Baun as a Saint versus Zack Baun as an Eagle, and we're going to throw to it really quick. I want to give credit where credit is due because that's important. Uh-oh, there we go. My computer just froze up. We can't have that today. We can't have that. So Brandon Lee Gouton puts out the following tweet, and we're going to do a stat comparison here. Zack Baun in 62 games with the Saints, 88 total tackles, 6 tackles for a loss, 8 QB hits, 1 interception, 2 sacks, 2 pass defense, 0 forced fumbles. Compare that to with the Eagles. In 13 games. So 62 versus 13. From 88 total tackles up to 129 this season. From 6 tackles for a loss up to 9. From 8 QB hits up to 5. All right, so it's a little bit of a drop. Again, 62 versus 13 games. The interceptions are the same. He has an extra 1.5 sacks. And he has 4 additional forced fumbles. Listen, sometimes guys just need a change of scenery. Sometimes guys need an increased role. Sometimes guys just need a coordinator to believe in them. Those numbers are absolutely astounding. Legitimately astounding. Now, is it a case where Vic Fangio just knows how to use Zack Baun better? Maybe. Again, you can't overstate or overvalue the importance of a new coordinator, especially one that is as well respected across the league as Vic Fangio. I mean, if you start to, let's take a second here. if you take a second to think about the young guys on the team that have all taken steps, the young guys like the Quinyon Mitchells and the Cooper DeJeans who are producing at a way higher than expected level as rookies. That's one piece. Reed Blankenship's continued ascension. That's another piece. Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Milton Williams being absolutely stout up the middle. That's another part of it. And then you think about Zack, Baun, Nakobe Dean, Nolan Smith have all taken massive steps. That, in large part, is your defensive coordinator. That's also position coaches, but that's your defensive coordinator, maximizing the talent that he's been given. That's huge. Now, we do have to get into some of the negatives really quick, because there were a couple of negatives that came out, and there have become talking points that I'm sure are going to be something that Sports Talk Radio today, if they haven't already started running with it, I'm sure that they will soon. But I do want to try to get out to some of the comments here before we go. Negadelphia here, which we're not going to do a lot, but there were some concerns. Ford noting that the Chiefs, once again, get by. They got by the Chargers, 2-point win. There's somebody on the Snow the Goalie panel who said that the Chiefs aren't going to make the Super Bowl, and I told him he's nuts. Now, I would never tell you that it was Anthony Sanfilippo. It was Anthony Sanfilippo said that the Chiefs aren't going to make the Super Bowl. I think he's insane. But this is what it is. Let's see. I saw some other Eagles stuff here, and now they're here we go. Jamie said, CJGJ played through multiple injuries too. He was key yesterday. Came out of the game. I think he was in the tent. They put him in the blue tent. He came out and he recorded an interception. That was great. Ford notes that Slay also had a holding call down the stretch, but it was a BS call. Let's see. We just lost something here. All right, there we go. People arguing about the Flyers in the comments. Why are we arguing about the Flyers, guys? Why are we doing that today? There's no point. What are we getting so worked up about? We'll go to Ford. Ford has spammed the comments with his same comment here a few times. So we'll go to Ford, who can then just shut the front door. Says multiple problems with the last drive. Hurts delay of game killed them. Hurts slid for a loss of 8. Dumb. Play calling should have kept running the ball, not passing when you had momentum. Okay. So the negative coming out of yesterday's game. The negative was the passing game. And there's no way to get around it. The passing game underwhelmed. Now on the same day, let's go one more positive. On the same day where Saquon Barkley set the Eagles single season. On the day where Saquon Barkley set the Eagles single season record for rushing yards, somehow he was forgotten down the stretch. He was absolutely dominant once again. He was once again the ultimate X factor, and he was the guy who flipped the game on its head once again, because it's what Saquon Barkley does. Now, he gives all the credit to the offensive line. He always goes out of his way to credit the offensive line. He got 20 rushing attempts in the game. That's his fewest in the last few weeks. Had 124 yards, up from 107 against the Ravens. He averaged 6.2 yards per carry, and yet it felt like late in the game, yet again, the Eagles just forgot that they could run the ball with him. They forgot how dominant he was. Just to give you a little bit of context on that 6.2 yards per carry, okay? That is the most yards per carry that he's had since he averaged almost 10 per carry against the Rams. In his last, 7 games, 6.2 yards per carry is the second highest yards per carry that he's had in the last 7 games. And yet again, for whatever reason, this Eagles coaching staff just totally forgot that he existed. He blew open a bunch of big rushes. And then at the end of the game, they just went back to the passing game. The passing game looked out of sync all day. And where it really becomes a concern is that you can look at it and say, hey, Jalen Hurts, earlier in the season, when you were really concerned with him, the reason that you were so concerned was because of the turnover issues. He once again did not turn the ball over. He had no interceptions in the game. Threw for 2 touchdowns. Had a 66.7% completion percentage. But he only put the ball through the air. He only got 108 yards through the air, which is even down from last week where he only had 118. Now, you can look at that and say, is that on the quarterback? Is that on the play calling? Is that on the execution? Is that on the routes that are being run by the receivers? If you believe A.J. Brown, presumably there is a belief in the locker room that maybe the Eagles need to fix the passing game. And so we're going to go out to A.J. Brown after this one. This is what I said is going to be the thing that I'm sure will get blown way out of proportion by Sports Talk Radio today. But I do want to go to A.J. Brown. Let's get A.J. Brown's thoughts on the passing game. Again, only 108 yards through the air. I think it was, we were pretty far into the game before A.J. Brown even had a target go his way. But let's bring A.J. Brown up here for his thoughts. Here we go.
Offense wasn't good enough. What are some things you think that the offense needs to improve on? Passing.
AJ, I know everybody wants to get in a rhythm, and Devontae was acknowledging that. Receivers, just like running backs, want to get in a rhythm. How hard is it as a receiver to get into a rhythm when you guys are only throwing the ball like 20 times?
Incredibly tough.
It seemed like there was a moment on the sideline when you threw your helmet into the bench. What prompted that reaction?
3 and out.
As a leader on this offense, what's kind of your approach this week in changing the result in terms of everyone, and not just you, a lot of players on offense saying that this was just not up to the offensive standard?
Putting our head down and just going to work, doing the things we're doing and learning and growing.
What are the conversations?
All right, so he's a little bit hard to hear here, but let's go ahead and go through some of his answers here, and then there's one last question, but we'll come back to AJ here in a second. So the thing that they need to work on, in his opinion, was passing. When asked about whether or not it's hard to get into a rhythm, because Devontae Smith had also mentioned in his availability that it's hard to get into a rhythm, and just like a running back, as a receiver, it's good for you to get into some kind of a rhythm. A.J. Brown corroborated that yes, it's hard to get into a rhythm. It's asked about, is it hard to get into that rhythm when you only throw the ball 20 times? He says yes. And then this last, he's asked about why he threw the helmet on the sideline, which some people were turning into a big thing. And he said it was a 3 and out. The last answer that he gave, we'll go back to here. We'll scrub back, and then we'll pull up the last one as well. Here we go.
This was just not up to the offensive standard.
Putting our head down and just going to work, doing the things we're doing and learning and growing.
So he gave kind of like the canned response here about like you have to put your head down, go to work, do the things that you're supposed to do. Okay, last question.
What are the conversations like with Jalen during a game like this, where maybe the passing game isn't everything you want it to be?
Not too much conversation, honestly. I don't know.
So there are people who have tried to blow the passing line out of the water, like they are out of proportion, where they're making it sound like A.J. Brown was taking a direct shot at the coach. Was taking a direct shot at the quarterback. Now, I think there's a little bit more in the system, but I do want to show you this. This is the play that it seems like people got really upset about, and it was at the end of the first half. And as you can see, A.J. Brown doesn't have a single guy within 5-6 yards of him, right? There's a pick play happening down here. Let's see, will my mouse show up if I click over here? Oh, there we go. Kind of looks like a pick here. But A.J. Brown, it should be a pretty wide open throw. I don't know why Jalen Hurts didn't see him. I have no idea. But that's a play that if you're A.J. Brown, it's going to piss you off. Here's Devontae running towards the pylon. Now, if you're A.J. Brown, do you have the right to be pissed off after that? Probably. That's just you're frustrated with your quarterback in the moment. Now, there were other things that came out of yesterday that had people starting to worry. Now, again, I don't like to blow things out of proportion, but we do have to kind of remember that last year, things started to fall apart, and it felt like there were some moments last year where there was a bit of frustration between the receivers and the quarterback. And then it seemed like between the quarterback and the coach, right? It was sort of all over the place. I want to go to Jalen Hurts because Jalen Hurts was asked about the passing game, and he was asked about trying to get A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith involved early in the game. And Jalen, I think, usually takes a lot of responsibility, and sometimes it's a canned response, but it feels like he throws it on himself. But this was a little bit different because this didn't totally sound like he was saying that he was fully to blame for it. Let's hear what Jalen Hurts had to say about getting Devontae and A.J. Brown involved in the game.
Jalen, you guys have a lot of talented players on offense, Devontae, AJ, Saquon. As a quarterback in a game like this, how do you manage making sure AJ feels like he's getting enough, Devontae, and obviously
I play my role in it and how we execute, but ultimately it's about what position we put ourselves in. But it's not my choice.
What did you make of the pass?
What does that mean? Let's hear that one back. Run that one back. The end of the quote is the thing that really kind of makes the ears perk up a little bit. At the end there.
I play my role in it and how we execute, but ultimately it's about what position we put ourselves in. But it's not my choice.
It's not my choice. Okay, what is not his choice? That to me is the thing that's worth asking today. So all the sports talk radio people who are going to focus in on A.J. Brown, and I'm sure that there are going to be a bunch of, outrage merchants who are going to go on the air and they're going to try to turn this into A.J. Brown versus Jalen Hurts. What is he talking about when he says it's not my choice? That to me says I'm not the one who's calling all the plays. Sure, he audibles, but he's not the one calling the plays. Now, does he feel like it was too much of a helter-skelter game? I mean, if you look at possession in the first half, the Eagles had, I think, eight or so minutes fewer possession than Carolina did, which is far from ideal. But what exactly is he talking about, and who is it on? We have a real issue here in that there are games where Jalen Hurts looks like an absolute stud, and he gets in rhythm. His receivers get in rhythm. They were missing Dallas Goedert, who goes on IR, could potentially be back by the end of the regular season. But Calcaterra was in. Calcaterra had a couple of big catches, had some big plays. But, I can't imagine that this was all because Dallas Goedert was out of the lineup. It's back-to-back weeks where Jalen Hurts doesn't even get to 120 yards through the air. Now, again, you have this balancing act, right? Because Barkley is so dominant, and Barkley can get you so many of the big plays that you need, that it takes a lot of the pressure off the passing game. But Hurts wasn't the most accurate. I know I said he was like a 66.7% completion percentage, which on paper looks really nice. But there were some moments that, he missed, what's his nuts? Johnny Wilson over the middle. Johnny Wilson's a huge target. He overthrew him. There were some other missed reads. We took a look at the screenshot of A.J. Brown wide open going across the middle into the end zone. That's disappointing. Do I think that it's a massive concern coming out of Sunday? No. Do I think that it could become problematic? I do. I actually think that there's a bigger thing. If you really want to get upset about the passing game and you really want to get yourself upset about could there be beef between the receivers and the quarterback, which you certainly hope won't be the case, the thing that is still a concern is the Eagles in the first quarter. Because that to me is the thing that you have not been able to fix. And that to me is the thing that will kill you in the postseason, without a doubt. I believe they said on the telecast, the Eagles have here we go. I found a Jimmy Kempski thing that actually does confirm what I was about to say number-wise. The Eagles this year have scored 17 points in the first quarter. That's it. 17. They've been outscored 59-17 in the first quarter of games this year. Jimmy Kempski here has the full breakdown. So you go week by week. Lost the first quarter 6-0. 0-0. 3-0. 14-0. 0-0. 0-0. 7-0. Then they had a 2-week span where they scored a touchdown, back-to-back weeks. Had a 7-0 lead, a 7-3 lead. Then, losing 7-0. The following week, they got a field goal. Jake Elliott remembered how to kick that week. But they were losing 7-3 after one. Last week against Baltimore, 9-0 deficit. Sunday against Carolina, 3-0 deficit. My issue that I have here, and I put this out on Twitter, and I'm going to see if I might start getting to the point where I'm going to start roasting people that say dumb shit on Twitter, because I feel like I'm reaching my limit of what I can handle. But I threw out this idea yesterday that, like, it's almost as if the first quarter is being called by a totally different person than the guy who's calling the plays for the second, third, and fourth quarter. Now, I believe Chris Long has also very much been on this boat all year. But this was the tweet that pissed me off, because I said the thing about first quarter looking like it was scripted by one person and the other quarters are, maybe a little bit more dynamic or are being handled by somebody else. So you have this guy, John Aficionado, with a trademark after it. That's great. Says, it's also like some of you forget the other team is full of pros too, and they have prepared to play all week as well. It's why good teams pull away as games go on. Depth wins out. And then I noted, they have 17 first quarter points this season. 17. To which this guy responds, is that the only quarter that matters for winning? Do first quarter points count more? Are they not 10-2? It's a 60-minute game. Let more clock go before the hot takes. And I will remind this person, this John Aficionado, who also follows me, it's not a hot take if it's the right take. And if it's a hot take to say that it's absolutely patently absurd that an Eagles team that wants to be a Super Bowl contender should score more than 17 points this far into the season in the first quarter, then okay, I guess I'm nuts. But for the rest of us who live in the real world, I think we're all cognizant of the fact that getting outscored 59-17 is a pretty massive disparity, and that when you get to the postseason, staring down a deficit every first quarter is probably not going to end up very well for you. You need to get an early jump on teams. One could make the argument, if I may be so bold to respond to John Aficionado TM, if I may respond, it might not have been as close of a game on Sunday if your offense looked like it did late in the game in the first quarter, because you probably would have had a lead in the first. And because you're a good second quarter team, you might have been able to put your throat on the Panthers by halftime and effectively ended the game 30 minutes in. Instead of having to hope and pray that something goes your way in the fourth and you have a Leggett trapped ball after he blew the top off your defense with under a minute remaining, maybe instead of having to worry about that, you could just have a fucking lead. Maybe that's crazy. Maybe I'm nuts, but good teams can kind of figure out a way to win. But oftentimes, they like to have a lead, especially early. Great teams don't put themselves in a hole. And they don't put themselves in a hole almost every week. Now, we can look at it and say, Eagles defense might be the best in football. Eagles have the best running back in football. Eagles have arguably the best or one of the best wide receiver duos, have the best offensive line, have a quarterback who's dynamic, who people are still split on. You need to win in every facet of the game. And putting yourself in a hole when you get into the playoffs is not the way to do it. Now, we have brought up clips on this show all season where national pundits have said the first 15 plays are scripted. These are the plays that are supposed to get you the highest likelihood of scoring because you're basing them on what you've seen on film that should be able to attack the opposing defense. And yet, whoever is scripting those plays either isn't watching the film or is just totally removed from reality, because this offense sputters week in and week out in the first quarter. And it's not a small sample size at this point. We're not 3, 4, 6 games into the season. It's a legitimate problem. And you know what? When somebody says, well, aren't they 10-2? And this is now they're 11-2, but as of that tweet, aren't they still 10-2? Yeah. Weren't the Eagles 10-2 last year? Yeah. And what happened? ¿Qué pasó? The wheels fell off. No, I don't think the wheels are going to fall off here because I have significantly more belief in the defense, especially with Vic Fangio at the helm. And I have significantly more faith in Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator of this team. I don't think it's going to fall apart. And I don't, as I mentioned before, I don't take the A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith also saying that they're not on the same page. I don't take those quotes and say these guys hate the quarterback and the whole thing's about to fall apart. What I will simply point out is if the crux of your argument where you look logic in the face and say, they're 10-2. That's not the thing that you build your case on. It's just patently absurd. Okay? If you want to make a Super Bowl run, you have to put up points in the first quarter and preferably get on the opponent early. Because the longer you allow another team, especially one that's not as good, the way that you allow them to stay in games is by allowing them to get on the board first or to hold you off and give their defense some confidence. Now, again, I think Carolina is a better team than that record indicates. But my biggest takeaway from that game, from a concern perspective, you have to figure out a way to get Saquon Barkley more involved early in games, and you certainly, throughout the game, need to figure out a better way to get this star-studded wide receiving duo in some kind of rhythm. 118 yards last week through the air and 108 this week through the air simply isn't good enough. Were there missed reads? Were there missed throws? There were. Did anybody at any point on Sunday feel like, oh, they're close? No, it felt like Saquon Barkley was going to have to save the day, and it felt like the defense was going to have to make a big stop. Luckily, the ground was the 12th man on defense for the Eagles late in that game. Now we're going to go out to some of the comments here, and then we're going to kind of do a couple of other things. Jamie Royo says, my biggest worry is our passing attack. How is it so bad with our receiving core? Jalen worries me. It's a fair critique, okay? If the big takeaway here as a fan is I'm concerned about Jalen Hurts because of the screenshot that we looked at, or because of the overthrows, or because it seems like he takes a couple of checkdowns when there is a guy, as the play is developing, he maybe is more apt to running and trying to pick up big yardage chunks through by using his legs instead of allowing for the play to develop and drop one over the top to Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown. Some of that's fair. I will point out that part of what made yesterday's game a lot less concerning from my vantage point, at least for the quarterback, is that when you are able to put film out there that shows your burst is back, that your speed is back, that your ability to make big plays with your legs is back, all of a sudden, you need to stack the box. All of a sudden, opposing defenses have to now account for that, which could free up your wideouts as they try to burn the respective corners. Okay? And maybe it takes some extra attention from a safety. So what you ultimately need to do here is put that kind of film out there, put that thought in the back of a defensive coordinator's mind, put that thought in the back of a defense's mind. So again, like, not a perfect game, and I'm not going to stand here, which I am. I'm standing. I'm short, but I'm standing. I'm not going to stand here, and say that Jalen Hurts had a perfect game. He didn't. But when you simply just break down the numbers, he was efficient enough. Again, 66.7% completion percentage, 110.8 passer rating, 2 touchdowns through the air, no interceptions. I don't really know what anybody else wanted from him. I really don't. Went 14 of 21 through the air. It wasn't a perfect game. It was a good enough game. If there's a concern through the air, it's that his longest completion was 27 yards, and we know that Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown both have the ability to bust the top of a defense, right, and go for a big gain. And it didn't happen yesterday. All right, fine. Let's chill. He had 8 rushes for 59 yards, and one of those was like a 35-yard pickup that got you into the red zone. Again, there are things to get upset about. There are weeks to be upset. This isn't one of them. I don't think it is. You could certainly let me know if you think that I'm an idiot and I'm wrong, and I'll bring it up on the show. Andrew Fawcett says Hurts is a scramble first quarterback. He isn't a passer. Ford, in all caps, says Hurts almost cost him the game. Jamie apparently has been listening to Sports Talk Radio this morning. Said, will it be blown out of proportion, the A.J. Brown thing? It already has been this morning. Great. I will not turn on the radio today. I don't listen to a lot of Sports Talk Radio anyway, but I will certainly avoid it like the plague if that's the case. Everybody's just... Controversy creates cash, the old Eric Bischoff principle, but it's at some point, it just gets a little bit old. It does. Andrew Fawcett doesn't think that Hurts can see the field that well. His decision-making has always been suspect. Or, there are games where he doesn't make the right reads. And then after the fact, you look at it and you feel a little bit less good. Connor Allen says, I am now here for the new schedule. Thank you, Connor. I appreciate you being here. Very much. What's this shit? Ford says, Kincaid, the 97.5 Kincaid, not the Crossing Guard Kincaid, had a whole thing this morning about, can the Eagles win the Super Bowl with Hurts as quarterback? Jesus. I hope that's not true. Ford, let me know if that was earnest or not. Because I just... What's the alternative? Kenny Pickett? Is somebody going to actually go to battle for Kenny Pickett? I'm not. Absolutely not. No way. Let's see. I just lost it. Here we go. Christian Newton, a buddy of mine, says the stark contrast between 2 years ago and this season is that the team was killing teams in the first half and just going through the motions in the second. Okay, so let's unpack that one a little bit. He's right. He's right that the Eagles got on teams early in games 2 seasons ago. If you want to look for a positive on that versus this, I like a team that can finish stronger because ultimately when you get to the playoffs, it's better to have been battle-tested and have to go down the field and pick up critical points or drive for the win at the end of games. So to that end, the Eagles are kind of developing a much more useful skill set for the playoffs. And at the same time, we can still be critical of the fact that they aren't jumping on anyone. Now, I don't know who that comes down to. Like some might say, is that like a Shane Steichen thing? Was Steichen the one who was able to do that? I don't know. I don't know. I will tell you that I'm concerned that like if you can't get on teams early in the postseason, you're screwed. Ford says, I had an idiot on X tell me that the Eagles are feeling out their opponents and not playing down to them. I then tweeted at him in the fourth quarter and asked if they were still feeling it out. So let's go to that. There is a small part of me that knows this isn't the case, but there's a small part of me that's like, hey, what if the scripted plays are really to just kind of test different things about what the defense is going to likely do later in games? And the Eagles are willing to concede not building rhythm in the first quarter because they're trying to develop the plan that they're going to manipulate later on in the game. That would be a really wishful thinking. I don't think that's what it is. I really don't. Let's see. Landros 2 says, Hurts was terrible yesterday. Full stop. Riding Barkley saved the day again. He had missed reads, but again, stat-wise, not turning over the ball. I can't say that he was terrible. I'd say he was underwhelming. Wouldn't say he was terrible. Chris Freed, Hurts is a game manager. As long as you don't expect anything more from Hurts, all is fine. And then we go here as well. A win is a win, and you move on. I am now pretty much done with the Eagles game. We'll have more. We'll break down more if there are more sound bites by Wednesday, because remember, we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week. We'll come back to the Eagles. Now, there are a couple of other things that I wanted to get to. The basketball team picked up a win. Talk about that for a second. The Phillies were never in on Juan Soto. He now ends up in the NL East. But before we do, oh, by the way, Ford does confirm that apparently John Kincaid on The Fanatic did the Can the Eagles win a Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts. Fucking great. That's awesome. That's good content. Good luck. When have the ratings come out at all for the last book? I don't think they have. I can't wait to see what happens in the ratings book. I have some theories. I might put those theories on the record on this show about how some gaps I think are going to open up even more. we'll get to that later. Connor Allen says, Russ, can you give your take on Uber drivers outside of Xfinity Live? I will go out of my way for a second to inform the masses about what happened last night, just very briefly, because to me, it was such a problem. I tweeted this last night. We'll throw this up on the screen. I was so incensed last night because the Flyers pushed back opening puck drop a half hour to accommodate, traffic because of the Eagles game. And I tweeted the following. Let's put it in this view. Throw all taxi and Uber drivers who block traffic around Xfinity Live in jail. Now you might say to yourself, Russ, that seems a little bit extreme. How could you throw them in jail? Russ, don't you know, taxi drivers and Uber drivers, they save the drunk people from driving. Okay, well, to that end, thank you to each and every taxi, Uber, Lyft, and designated driver who got a bunch of Eagles fans home safely from the game without driving under the influence. That's great. But all those people who block 2 full lanes of traffic around Xfinity while they sit waiting for drunk people to come outside, those people can go sit in a jail cell. It is complete and utter bullshit. What are we doing? Now, I could take the police who allow it to happen. I could take them to task, but I won't because I respect the police and I don't want to get myself in trouble. But I will say it's very disappointing. I turned on to Patterson. So, recap. Eagles game's going on. I'm constantly monitoring what the traffic is like getting into the city because I don't want to have to sit in 2 hours of traffic instead of like an hour and a half. Okay. I end up figuring out, I can actually get on the road a little bit later. I can go get a little bit of Christmas shopping done, and then I can end up down in Philly with more than enough time. So my drive-in took about let's say 45 minutes from where it would have been longer. So let's go from King of Prussia into the sports complex. It's about 45 minutes, which is kind of on par. I got to turn on Patterson, and all of a sudden, the right lane that I expect to be Uber, that was packed. But the next one over that I don't expect to be a problem ends up being a big problem. I see a bunch of near accidents. And I get to within probably 2 car lengths of Xfinity Live. And I realize the reason that there's been this big pileup is because a bunch of dipshit drivers, taxi and Uber, 2 I think had actually hit each other. And they were yelling at each other. And then the one was yelling at the other to back up so they could both park in the right lane. I'm thinking to myself, we have this jam, a jam-o as Bob Kelly would say, because the right lane is blocked. And then the second lane over has a couple of Uber and taxi drivers. But I assume that coming around the bend onto whatever street that is between the Link and Wells Fargo Center, I assume that there's probably a ton of traffic. No. Once I got around, there was nobody. There was no traffic. So these people, these Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, taxi drivers, taking up 2 lanes of traffic with no one getting in the car. Nobody. I saw a couple of people, pedestrians, walking between rows of parked traffic and getting Ubers behind me in the 3rd lane. But these people were blocking 2 lanes. What are we doing? Now, I did see the idea was there about footbridges, that footbridges would be great up and over. I totally co-sign that. In fact, the next time I see Dan Hilferty, which will probably be Thursday night when we do the Press Row show, I'm going to ask him why no one has thought of footbridges. Or if they have, could they be part of the development? They're going to put all this money into having, housing and more restaurants and shopping, which I think is actually kind of nice. They're going to do that down in the sports complex. Can we get some footbridges? I don't need to keep stopping because pedestrians are drunkenly wandering into traffic. And can we also figure out a way to jettison? Can I catapult? Can I use a trebuchet? Put a Lyft driver, have their car get flung over the fence. I can't handle it anymore. I was very upset. Jamie says, Phillies games, they park on both sides of the street to try to get everyone coming out of Citizens Bank Park. It's not fun. I agree. Connor Allen says, it blows my mind that police do absolutely nothing with all the traffic in the complex. Nothing at all. Correct. Oh, what's this? T from the TO3 almost died. Thankful to be alive as I almost died early Sunday morning as a guy missed my car and nailed the car ahead of me. T from the TO3. Trevor, I hope you're okay. That is harrowing. That is not good. But I'm glad you're okay. I hope the person that was in the car that got nailed ahead of you is also okay. I kind of get the feeling they might not be based on what you said here, but I hope everybody's okay. That's scary. Okay, so we talked about the drivers. Last 2 quick points. There was a nice moment in the Flyers game, and it wasn't the play on ice because that was mostly dog shit. There was a positive moment that came out of it because Matvei Michkov, at the very end of the game, is getting, tossed from the game, and he goes down the tunnel to go to the back. Now, mind you, he gets on the bench and he's going past everybody, right? So for like 30, 45 seconds or so, Michkov is walking past his teammates. Everybody's, going nuts for him because he kind of got in a fight. He threw a jab. Everybody was happy about it. Everybody felt good. Here's where things got really interesting. Michkov gets to the end of the bench. He goes between Ersin and Kolosov. And I just want you to see really quickly what Michkov does that got the crowd absolutely buzzing.
A man of the people, throws a couple
So
punches,
here he goes
to the locker room, and we'll sign something on the way.
Somebody
there.
hands
Why
him a
not?
water bottle. It's a Flyers water bottle. They hand him a Sharpie. You can see he's bleeding on the chin.
It's not going to matter. Everybody else looking at the scoreboard there. He's done for the night. Should have signed it in blood.
A man.
So, recapping. Michkov, out of the game, end of the game, going up the tunnel, gets handed a water bottle, gets handed the Sharpie, presumably for a kid. He stops, signs it, goes. Why does it matter? Because in the midst of a very bad game where most people had left because Morgan Frost overskated a puck and went the other way in 5-hole, end of game, Michkov, presence of mind, whatever, man of the people, signs an autograph for a kid on his way out. The fans in the building who had mostly just kind of fallen into like the somber, they're going to lose this game and we didn't beat traffic. We're just going to sit here. When it got to Michkov getting the bottle and the Sharpie and starting to sign it, that place erupted like a goal had been scored. And so simply put, it was a really nice moment, and he just made a kid's day, probably made a nice memory for that kid. And while we talked about this on the Press Row Show postgame, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts in the Snow the Goalie feed, or you can go on YouTube and watch it, as Bundy kind of offered his thoughts on it as well, and Ant did as well. That to me is like a very good thing. It's a very good sign. Now, there might be hockey traditionalists who don't like that, think that it's distracting. The game is still going on. I looked at it and said, really cool moment. For a 19-year-old, 20 today, happy birthday to Matvei Michkov. That is a cool moment that he gave that kid. And it also shows that he understands just how important it is that he does the right things. And listen, I think the fans have made a really good impact and a good impression on him. I do. I mean, he's very clearly the face of the franchise. By far. So seeing him do that, I thought was a really nice thing. Final thing before we leave. The Sixers, my friends. The Sixers might actually be, if not back, they are close to back. Or at least they're close to back when Joel Embiid plays. Joel Embiid returned to the lineup last night, and he looked significantly better. Like miles and miles better. 31 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks in a win against the Bulls. And if you're looking for something to maybe take away as a positive, it's that if you can get Embiid, I said this to intern Andrew last night. If you can get 2 out of 3 of Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid to play 3 out of every 4 games. So do the mental math and how many games that means each guy plays. 2 out of 3 of those guys, 3 out of every 4 games, they will make the playoffs. They are now 8 games under 500, but they are showing signs of life. And if Embiid is going to look better than the broken down version of him that we saw earlier when he tried his first comeback, they're going to be able to make the playoffs. I don't know what to tell you. They're 12th in the conference right now. They're going to jump the Pistons. They will jump the Bulls. They will certainly get past 1 or 2 of the Pacers, Nets, and Hawks. I am not bullish on this Eastern Conference being some legitimately difficult conference to win. Cleveland somehow is still 21-4. I don't understand that. I can't explain to you why Cleveland is as good as they are. I guess I need to watch more Cavs games. But you got Cleveland, Boston, Orlando, the Knicks, the Heat, the Bucks. Those 6 teams I would expect to make the playoffs. So that means a bunch of teams are going to fight for the bottom 2 spots. I think that a healthy Sixers team is clearly better than the Hawks, the Nets, the Pacers, and the Bulls, and the Pistons. I don't think it's going to be that hard to jump. Now, will they end up with the 8th seed? Maybe. I think that the 6th seed or something around there is still potentially in the mix. I think that Miami will fall out of the top 5. I wouldn't be surprised if Miami's competing for the 7th or 8th seed. Now, that might be viewed as like, oh, you're overvaluing it because they're coming off a win. No. Here's the one thing that we can. This is the last thing. The Sixers have built a team that has players, role players, who have very specific roles. But the roles that they're meant to play are predicated on Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid being in the lineup. None of the role players that they've gone out and acquired have the inherent ability to raise their game consistently over an extended period of time. Eric Gordon can't be a 25-point scorer for like 10 or 15 games in a row, right? Kelly Oubre doesn't have another level to go to. Kyle Lowry can't turn back the clock and raise his level to be like an 18-point-per-game scorer for like a 20-game stretch. Andre Drummond cannot replicate the numbers that Joel Embiid can over an extended period of time. But if these guys are able to be healthy in some respect, in some kind of mismatch thing, this Sixers team will win games. I am very confident of it. And if anybody was hoping they're going to tank, it ain't happening. So look at that. We ended on a little bit more positivity today. Good for us. Good for all of us today. I want to thank all of you for joining me on a Monday morning. I will remind you one more time. This was actually, I'm looking at the live viewer numbers today across the 2 YouTube channels and across the Facebook and across X. And it's a nice Monday morning audience. The show is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you were unaware of this, the drive to 500 subscribers, we are closer than ever. Once the channel, the YouTube channel, the Russ Joy Show YouTube channel hits 500 subscribers, I will randomly select a subscriber to the channel who will win the jersey of their choice worth up to $175. In theory here, I mean, I know Fanatics has a pretty long turnaround time, but in theory, if we hit that 500 here in the next week or so before Chris Mahana Kwanzaa, it is possible that that person could get their winning jersey by the holiday season. So if you haven't done so already, subscribe over on YouTube. And if you're more of a podcast person and you're like, oh, I don't want to see Russ's, 5 head 3 times a week. I like to listen in the podcast feed. Don't worry. Show's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, today went a little bit long because we had the Eagles game to break down. Again, the goal here is going to be to do slightly shorter shows if we're going to go 3 times a week. Now, I have a propensity for talking a lot, and I love seeing all the people in the comments, including Nico over here with a little bit of positivity, saying it was great to see Embiid smiling as well. I like the positivity. Oh, shit! I forgot the negative! Oh, no! How did I forget? Because it's not really a Philly thing, but it is. We do have to talk about one more thing. It was this. Not Taiwan Walker wanting to go back to the Mets. But Taiwan, thanks for checking in. All the best to you wherever the hell you end up. Hopefully it's never in a Phillies uniform again. Juan Soto went to the Mets. And now, I have to get out of here. But I have to say really quickly, Juan Soto going to the Mets kind of is what it is. And there's a very interesting clause in the contract that makes me feel a little bit better today than I did last night. But Juan Soto left the Yankees and decided that apparently the Mets are a better choice long-term as a winning team. I don't know if I agree with him, but that's what they're saying. So Juan Soto got a 15-year, $765 million contract. Here's the interesting caveat. He can opt out after 2029. So he can play 5 years under this contract and then opt out and try to renegotiate a new deal with the Mets or go renegotiate somewhere else. But another interesting thing broke overnight. The Mets have the option to invalidate that player opt-out. But if they do that, they have to pay him an extra $5 million per year, which would take his annual salary to $55 million a year, which would take the overall value of the contract from $765 million all the way up to $805 million. Now, you might be saying to yourself, like Nico is here, boo. Or like T from the TO3, Juan Soto, you bum. Here's what I'll say. Good for Juan Soto getting that money. That's absurd. I cannot imagine wanting to pay any human being that amount of money to play a sport or to do anything, quite frankly. That's an absurd amount of money. Am I disappointed that the Phillies weren't even engaged? Yes. And I think we're allowed to have those two things working in tandem. I think you are totally within your right to say, hey, I'm glad the Phillies didn't give this guy potentially over $800 million on a 15-year contract that I think will take him till he's 41 years old. And at the same time, you can also be pissed off that the Phillies weren't involved. And here's what I'll say. Right now, and especially based on recent comments, it sure feels like the Phillies, at least right now, are preparing the fan base for, we're going to run this shit back. We're going to run it back. Now, Anthony Sanfilippo last night, at the end of the press row show, we talked about this very briefly. He's like, I don't think they're going to run it back. I think they're going to make changes. The public comments to this point have been, we don't really need to make that many changes. We'll make some small tweaks here and there. The New York Mets just went out and got the best free agent in Major League Baseball. The Dodgers have continued to put their nonsensical contracts with deferred money in place because Rob Manfred doesn't have the cojones to stop them or to put any kind of structural thing into the CBA, an addendum perhaps, that these players should get paid now instead of like 20 years from now. The Dodgers have gotten better. The Mets, who are in your division, just went out and dropped boku bucks to get better. And it sounds like Jeff Passan said on Scott Van Pelt's show last night that the Mets aren't done, that they're going to keep spending money. If I have to get Wish.com's Mr. Rogers, a.k.a. Dave Dombrowski, coming out here in the next couple of weeks saying, well, we tried. We explored a few things, but we're happy with our team. I will lose my mind. My head might pop off of my shoulders. It legitimately might. And right now, it sure feels like the Phillies are trying to tell people, don't get your hopes up. I don't know what hopes there are to get up. There's no one else out there on the free agent market that gets me all hot and bothered. There's nobody that I think right now is a legitimate game changer the way that obviously Juan Soto would have been. Now, could the Phillies ultimately trade Nick Castellanos or trade Turner or Alec Bohm? Maybe. Could they trade Ranger Suarez? Maybe. Are any of the players they're going to get back legitimate game-changing players? My hunch as of right now is no, because I have yet to see a name rumored in Major League Baseball as being on the trade block that could impact your team the way that a Juan Soto could have. It doesn't mean that they're screwed, and it doesn't mean that the Phillies are going to fall off the face of the earth. But the Braves are still very good. The Mets just got better and apparently want to keep getting better. The Dodgers got better. We don't even have to look at the American League. It is going to be such a bloodbath as currently constituted in the National League next year. If you're the Phillies, you better figure it out. And you better figure it out pretty freaking fast. Otherwise, these fans that decided they were going to jump on the bandwagon at the end of the year, right? Because they didn't really believe that you guys could perform in the postseason. They watched you down the stretch play a lot of 500 baseball, but they got hyped for Red October and watched you get your teeth kicked in by the same Mets team that just signed Juan Soto. Those people aren't coming back if they feel like there's no chance of this team even competing in the regular season. So the Phillies have some significant work to do. And we will cover all of that over the next few weeks, the next few months, here on the Russ Joy Show, which is now Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 times a week. Matthew Ryan saying, so you're saying the Phillies have no chance for at least 5 more years? No, I'm not saying that. But they need to legitimately make some moves. Phantom67 says it's crazy money, because it is. Reed DeFord, run it back for the 4th time. Sounds great. Yeah, ask the Philadelphia Union how that worked out. Jamie says, looked for the Harper extension storyline to increase this season thanks to Soto. And Landros, too, saying, yo, Harper won't be happy. I'm going to tell you something. I would much rather... Oh, no, I'm not going to say it. If my options... Shit. This is how I feel, though. It's not shtick. It's real. If my options for the Phillies were give Bryce Harper another extension or trade him, I might be open to trading him. As of right now, there's no cap in baseball. It doesn't look like there ever will be a cap. If John Middleton's going to keep being the owner and he's willing to pay that money, then fine. But if that money is going to kind of linger in the back of his mind as a reason to not go out and make another big splash, or is going to give Dave Dombrowski some kind of cover to not go out and make a big splash and to make the team better, then you might have to have a conversation. I don't know how you could give Bryce Harper an extension. I genuinely don't. The injuries piled up this year. And I will simply point out west to a guy that a lot of people wanted in this town who won multiple MVPs. And I have to tell you, Mike Trout is not even I wouldn't even touch Mike Trout with a 10-foot pole. Harper had a bunch of injuries this year. And that was also coming off of the tear in his elbow. I don't think that contract's going to age well. There is no reason to add on to the end of it. That is all. Dirch says, anyone is fair game if it improves the team. This is also a business, not a party. Jimmy King says, Russ throwing strays at the Union out of left field. So right, though. No matter how good your team is, you have to keep things fresh and improve. I love the Union, right? I will always love the Union. I'm glad that Philly has a soccer team. I wish Jay Sugarman would sell that team. But they are, case in point, like they are a perfect example of why you can't just run it back. That was a team that was within minutes of winning MLS Cup. Mbaizo let Gareth Bale run to the far post. Header. You go to extra time. You lose. You lose MLS Cup. And they kept running it back. And then they missed the playoffs. Not ideal. All right, we ended on a down note, but we had to do that. We'll be back on Wednesday and on Friday here on the Russ Joy Show, 8:30 a.m., bright and early. If you haven't done so already, go subscribe to the Russ Joy Show channel on YouTube. Get entered to win a jersey of your choice as part of the drive to 500 subscribers. And, of course, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I will be back on Wednesday. Thank you to everybody who tuned in live. Thank you to all of you who listen in the podcast feed after the fact. Until Wednesday, I'm Russ Joy. But you already knew that because you're smart. And it's also the name of the show. Talk to all of you Wednesday.